Somewhere in the North Atlantic, at 11:43 p.m. on an ordinary Tuesday, a submarine cable carrying 400 terabits of data per second went completely, utterly silent. Nobody noticed, not at first. That's the thing about the end of something massive. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send a warning. It simply stops. And for exactly 12 minutes, the world teetered on a wire so thin that most people alive today still don't know how close everything came to collapsing. This is the story of those 12 minutes. The cable was called MAREA. Every email sent across the ocean, every video call, every financial transaction between New York and London, all of it traveled through that single cable. And at 11:43 p.m., something severed it. Not physically, not a ship's anchor, not an earthquake, something else. Something that caused every signal inside the cable to behave as if it had hit a wall of static. Clean data going in, nothing coming out, just silence, spreading from the deepest part of the cable outward, like ink dropped into still water. The first person to register the anomaly was a network operations engineer in a monitoring center outside Dallas. He looked at his colleague and said, very quietly, "Something's wrong with the Atlantic." She didn't laugh, because she was looking at her own screen, and she was seeing the same thing. Within 90 seconds, automated systems began rerouting traffic. The internet was built on redundancy, on paths and alternatives, on never having a single point of failure. The rerouting began instantly, and for a moment, it looked like the systems would hold. But then the second anomaly appeared, not in the Atlantic, in the Pacific. The faster cable, running from Oregon to Japan, began reporting similar interference patterns. Not severed, not offline, but degraded, corrupted. Signals arriving malformed, like photographs developed in the wrong chemical. And then, a third anomaly, in the Indian Ocean, on the MAREA 5 cable connecting Southeast Asia to Europe. 3 cables, 3 oceans, simultaneously. The engineers in Dallas stopped rerouting and started staring. Because there is no protocol for this. There is no manual that says what to do when the Atlantic goes silent and the Pacific goes corrupted and the Indian Ocean starts bleeding data. The redundancy systems couldn't compensate for this scale. It was like trying to redirect a river through a garden hose. At 11:46 p.m., 3 minutes in, the first surface effects began. In London, traders found their terminals frozen, not crashed, frozen, displaying data from 3 minutes earlier, perfectly still, as if time had stopped flowing through the fiber. In Singapore, entire blocks of information simply vanished in transit. In São Paulo, Brazil's fastest international connections collapsed by 60% in under a minute. The internet didn't go dark. What happened wasn't darkness. It was fragmentation. The world's network began to split along invisible fault lines, the way a windshield spiderwebs outward from a single point of impact. Connections didn't die. They became uncertain. At 11:48 p.m., 5 minutes in, satellite operators began picking up electromagnetic interference on low Earth orbit communication satellites. Not enough to take them offline, just enough to degrade them. And that was the most terrifying part of all. If you're drawn to stories like this one, the ones that live in the space between what we know and what we refuse to consider, you already understand why this matters. Critical Tomorrow exists for exactly this reason: to go where most channels won't, to ask the questions that feel uncomfortable. If this is your first time here, subscribe, because what happens next in those 12 minutes is where this stops being about cables and starts being about something far more human. At 11:49 p.m., the cascades reached the surface. Streaming services buffered across Europe. Social media platforms showed cached versions of feeds, old. Photographs appearing as brand new, a temporal echo where the present had been replaced by a recent past. In hospitals across 3 continents, remote diagnostic systems began showing delays. Not long delays, seconds. But in a system calibrated for milliseconds, seconds are enormous. Emergency dispatch centers in 4 American cities simultaneously experienced latency spikes in their computer-aided dispatch software. The systems didn't go down, they just slowed. A 911 call placed at 11:51 p.m. took 14 seconds longer than normal to be logged. 14 seconds. In an emergency, 14 seconds can be the difference between a door that opens and one that doesn't. And all of this was invisible to almost everyone experiencing it. That's the part that stays with you. Most people didn't know anything was wrong. They saw the buffering and blamed their Wi-Fi. They noticed the slow loading and blamed their device. They lived inside the disruption without ever understanding it was global, simultaneous, and entirely outside anyone's ability to prevent. At 11:52 p.m., 9 minutes in, a major cloud provider's automated failover triggered, designed for regional disruptions. But this wasn't regional. The system began moving workloads to what it believed were stable servers. Except the data it used to determine stability was itself corrupted. It was making decisions based on broken information, and those decisions made everything worse. Thousands of hospital record systems, financial platforms, logistics databases began migrating mid-operation. During the transfer, data stalled in limbo, partially in one place, partially in another, neither here nor there. There were people in that moment whose medical records were inaccessible, whose medication histories had no home for the length of minutes. Not deleted, not stolen, simply unreachable, as if the address of the building you'd always lived in had, for a few minutes, ceased to mean anything. At 11:54 p.m., 11 minutes in, something shifted. The engineers on the emergency coordination call, now spanning 4 continents, identified a pattern in the interference. It wasn't random noise. The corrupted signal had structure, a rhythm, as if it were, in some way, organized. They couldn't tell if it was an attack, a natural phenomenon with no existing category, or something else entirely. But the pattern gave them a thread to pull. A team in Tokyo isolated a frequency embedded in the interference. A team in Amsterdam confirmed it independently. They built a counter-protocol, a way to filter the corrupted layer out of the signal, untested, never deployed at scale. But at 11:54 p.m., with 1 minute remaining, they pushed it live. And at 11:55 p.m., the cables came back, not with a surge, quietly. The way a light returns after a brief outage, so normal you almost doubt it was ever off. MAREA resumed full signal. The Pacific cleared. The Indian Ocean restabilized. The satellite readings returned to baseline. London, the terminals updated. In Singapore, the packet loss ceased. In Sao Paulo, the routing recovered. 12 minutes. That was all it was. And the world never knew. The official explanation, buried in records most people will never find, describes a rare confluence of geomagnetic activity and harmonic interference in subsea fiber optic systems. It's the kind of sentence that answers nothing while sounding like it answers everything. The engineers on that call signed NDAs within days. The frequency from Tokyo, the counter-protocol from Amsterdam, gone from every internal record any journalist has managed to reach. What remains is only this. For 12 minutes, the world's connected systems fractured simultaneously across 3 oceans without any acknowledged cause. The infrastructure carrying your money, your medical history, your communications, the signals keeping people alive in hospitals became unreliable in ways that no redundancy system was built to handle. And most of the world had no idea. They watched their videos buffer. They went to bed. Somewhere in a monitoring center outside Dallas, an engineer wrote in the incident log, not as a technical note, but as something more personal. "We were lucky tonight. We should talk about what we do when we're not." Nobody replied. It was marked, resolved, and archived. Here's what keeps pulling at me. The fragility isn't new. We've always lived inside systems too complex for any single person to fully understand, too interconnected for failure to stay local, too invisible to think about until they stop working. The cables running along the ocean floor right now, at this very moment, carrying the signal that brought you to this video, are largely unprotected. They can be reached. They have been reached. And the systems meant to protect them are built on assumptions about failure that may no longer apply. We built a world that requires perfect connection to function, and we surrounded that requirement with infrastructure that is, in the end, physical, vulnerable, real. 12 minutes. That's what it took to reveal how thin the line actually is. 12 minutes of silence in the deep ocean, and everything we take for granted became briefly visible. Maybe next time it won't be 12 minutes. Maybe no one will find the pattern in time. If this story left you unsettled, good. That feeling is information. That feeling is the beginning of understanding what kind of world we've built and what it means to live inside it. Critical Tomorrow exists to hold that feeling without flinching, to look at the systems humming beneath our daily lives and ask honestly, what happens when they stop? Stay with us, because the next story might be the one that changes how you see everything.